Welcome to the Thoughtful Leader podcast. My name is Ben Brearley. I'm a leadership coach and the founder of Thoughtful Leader. The Thoughtful Leader podcast is all about short, sharp leadership advice because thoughtful leadership is good leadership. Welcome to episode 231 of the Thoughtful Leader podcast. In this episode, I'm going to talk about how you can set effective team goals. Now, it's an interesting one because I would have thought team goals would be something that's quite common in workplaces, but I still see instances where people don't really have good goals set up. And so I think it's good to deliver some tips to you thoughtful leaders out there, so you can hopefully get team goals working for you and your team. All right, let's get into the episode right now. Setting team goals is important for any leader, and when you get it right, you can improve motivation and performance. Getting it wrong can have quite the opposite effect. So during my career, I experienced various levels of team goal setting from good to bad and sometimes non-existent. So in this episode, I'm going to provide some tips that I believe lead to better goal setting, which will actually help you and your team rather than just be an administrative burden. So a good starting point is to think about why setting team goals is important. And we've all seen different forms of goals in different workplaces, so they're nothing new. But sometimes I think we forget the purpose of setting them in the first place. They're just there as part of the furniture. So let's take a quick pause to look at some of the good reasons for setting team goals. The first one is motivation. Goals give your people something to strive for. This can help to give them a sense of purpose, which is an important factor in motivation, especially according to the work of Daniel Pink. And I'll put a link to Daniel Pink's work in the show notes page as well. For this episode, it'll be thoughtfulleader.com/231. The second reason that goals are important is that it gives you a greater focus on results, because a big part of a leader's role is to focus on results. After all, a team only exists because it contributes to the outcomes of an organization in some way. It's important to note as well that a lack of focus on results is one of Patrick Lencioni's 5 dysfunctions of a team, which I'll link to in the show notes page, and these are some good dysfunctions we should pay attention to as well. The next thing about goal setting that's important is that it provides a sense of feedback. When team members have a good set of goals, the goals are a source of feedback. Feedback helps them see where they're doing well or need to get better. And lastly, goals can be useful for organizational alignment. Getting hundreds or thousands of people moving in the same direction is not easy, so setting team goals is one way to help you to do that. If you can align the individual team and departmental goals of an organization, you can hopefully steer the ship to where you need it to go. Now, unfortunately, I've worked in many organizations where people are cynical about goal setting. They aren't motivational, they're too vague, or they're simply considered to be an administrative overhead with little value. So let's see if we can reduce these types of issues and set better team goals. So when you're leading a team, it's a good idea to have a set of team goals that people can collectively strive for. So when you hit these, it's an indication of whether the team is working well together as a whole. But it's not the entire picture. Individual goals can be important too. These are tailored more specifically towards an individual and the role that they play, rather than the overall team goals. Now, individual goals allow you to provide personal feedback and give people a sense of how they're performing. Now, when the goals are all sitting at a team level, that personal focus is more difficult to achieve. Now, ideally, you'll have a set of individual goals that are aligned to the team goals. This means that people can see how their own efforts link to the performance of the team. Even better, your team goals will also align to those of the organization, and this provides a clear line of sight all the way from individual performance to the performance of the organization as a whole. Now, in motivation theory, this is sometimes known as task significance, which is the degree to which you can see the impact that your work is having on your organization. So let's go back a bit here as well. What is the difference between a goal, an objective, or a KPI? These terms are often used interchangeably, but they aren't all the same thing. A goal is usually at a higher level and less specific than an objective, and a KPI, or key performance indicator, is simply a measurement rather than a target. So let's clarify this with an example. So a company's goal might be to improve our online presence with our customers. So as you can see, this is quite broad and cannot be measured very easily. So one objective that could link to this goal might be to increase the number of visits to our website by 20%. And you might have several objectives that could link to the higher level goal to cover the goal from different angles. And now that I've just thought about that, you want to increase the number of visits to your website by 20%, but you should also put a timeline on that. So you should say by the end of December or something like that, because that gives you a target time to aim for. Now the KPI in this example, or key performance indicator, would be the number of website visits. Now, it's important to note here that the KPI is just a measurement. It doesn't actually tell you whether the website visits are too high or low, because this information is captured as part of the objective. So for simplicity's sake, for the rest of this episode, I'm just going to refer mainly to goals rather than switch around the terms too much, but just note that there can be differences between these terms depending on who is using them. So what do good goals look like? There is a useful framework that has been around for a long time, and it's called SMART, S-M-A-R-T. Now, the purpose of making your goals SMART is so you can be sure that you'll know when you've achieved them or if you haven't. So this stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. Okay, so let's start with the S, specific. You want to make sure your goal is narrow in focus so it's clear and concise. Now, this could be limiting your goal to talk about a specific product, location, or a customer segment. You also want to make it measurable. That's the M. This is about making sure you can measure achievement of the goal, whether it be the number of barrels of something produced, liters of water saved, number of customers served, or some other metric. The A is achievable. An achievable goal is one that is in your work scope and is realistic. If a goal is outside of your team's control or wildly unrealistic, it's not achievable, and it's also not very motivating, by the way. The R is for relevant. Relevance is about whether you should be doing this right now. For a team member, this might mean assessing whether their individual goal aligns with the work of the team, or it could be about questioning whether this goal is something to focus on now or maybe later. And the T is time-bound. Now, this one's very important, and it's about setting a time limit. Without an end time to measure this goal, you'll never know whether you've achieved it. So SMART is a basic framework that is the starting point for a good goal, but it isn't all there is. So let's look at some of the other important tips for setting team goals. Now, the first thing I think is very important is that when you're setting team goals, make them matter. One of the biggest problems I see with team goal setting is that the goals are uninspired and disconnected from the work of the team. So sometimes I see business unit or divisional goals that are cascaded down to the teams within them, and then sometimes these are cascaded further to the team members. So this means you might end up with a team member having a goal like improve the reputation of the organization within the community. Now, this sounds ridiculous, but I've seen it happen before. Now, not only does this not fulfill the SMART criteria I mentioned earlier, it's not motivating or inspiring because an individual wouldn't know where to start, and they certainly will struggle to measure it. Now, if you're faced with this situation, it's important to try to translate the goals to suit your team. Having a higher level goal like this is fine, but only if you can make it more specific for your people. Now, this might mean breaking it down to a very specific initiative to be achieved within a certain time frame and linking that to the higher level goal. I once led a technology program where the organization forced us to participate in the regular corporate goal setting process. The problem was that as contractors, our whole purpose was to deliver the program we were working on, and this meant that the goal-setting process was simply administrative overhead with no benefit to the team members involved. And this led us to spending very little time on it and distracted us from what our actual objective was, which was to deliver the program. Now, too often I also see people achieve their goals and see little reward. So congratulations, you get the same pay rise as everyone else this year, or nothing at all, which is actually quite common as well. Now, this is a good way to destroy any sort of enthusiasm for goal setting and to turn the whole activity into a box-ticking exercise. Even if you can't hand out pay increases as you'd like to, see if you can come up with some other options. Could you perhaps send someone on a training course or a conference as a reward? What about providing them with a few extra leave days or some other perk, like the opportunity to take on a new side project that interests them? Now, I don't have all the answers here for what you may offer your people, but you may need to get creative if you're going to make the goals matter. Otherwise, you might as well admit that the process is largely pointless, because if people achieve the goal and receive no benefit, then there's really nothing to keep them striving to work harder to achieve the goals in the future. Now, the second thing I'd consider here is to include skill development goals. Now, in Daniel Pink's book Drive, one of the key motivational factors he discovered is the concept of mastery. That is, learning new skills that matter to us and getting really good at them. Now, that's why it's important to incorporate development goals into your planning so that you can harness this motivational potential in your team members. Learning new skills can also be linked to completion of side projects that help to improve the team. In this way, you're helping people strive to improve themselves while also contributing to the success of the team. Now, too often I see development goals sitting separate from the work of the team. For example, somebody might have a development goal to gain a project management certification with no link to how that certification will actually help the team or the organization. Now, if you can link the skill development with the improvement of the team, you can achieve multiple purposes at once. And there's a useful podcast episode, well, in my opinion anyway, number 165, about how to provide development opportunities for your team. I'd recommend checking that out. You can get that link at the show notes page as well, thoughtfulleader.com/231. And while you're at it, if you're enjoying this episode or the podcast in general, I'd love it if you could leave a positive review on your podcast app of choice. Really helps me get the word out. I appreciate it in advance. The third thing to think about when setting team goals is to keep them current. Another challenge with traditional corporate goal setting lies in the length of the performance year. We set annual goals at the start of the year, priorities change, and by the time we review the goals, they may no longer be relevant or achievable. So it's important to be able to be flexible enough for the goals to remain current, otherwise they lose their motivational potential. Now, be sure to review team member goals frequently and make sure they're still relevant. If not, see if you can work with the team to update them. Now, if you're in a situation where your organizational goals are cascaded down and fixed for the year, I'd even recommend coming up with your own set of team goals that you can update when you need to. This way, you aren't restricted by the bureaucracy of your organization, and you can update your team goals if there are any major priority shifts within the regular performance year. The next thing I recommend thinking about is how to link your team and individual goals to the organizational purpose. So earlier in this episode, I mentioned that it can be beneficial to link individual team and organizational goals together. Now, this is important for a couple of reasons. The first thing is to align the work of our people and teams. If your people are working on something that has no link to the goals of the organization or the team, then why are they working on it? If your team is working towards a goal that can't be linked to an organizational goal, then why should the team focus on it? Secondly, it can be motivational for our people through providing what's called task significance, which I mentioned earlier. That is, people can clearly see the link between the work they are doing to the purpose of the organization and can observe its impact on the people or customers around them. So it's better when our people are working in alignment with our organization, because otherwise they'd probably be better off working somewhere else. And the last thing I would recommend in terms of goal setting is when setting team goals, involve your team members. Now, this is obviously a really important one. It's important to involve your team members in the goal setting process. This goes both for the goals of the team itself and the individuals within it. It's really hard for people to commit to the team when they have no say in what the team is trying to achieve. When the goals are simply handed down without consultation, people may feel demoralized at having no opportunity to help to shape the direction of the team. Now, at an individual level, it can be even worse. If you tell an individual that they must achieve a target with zero consultation, there is a chance that they may attempt to avoid accountability for that target because they never had a chance to actually discuss or agree to it. Now, of course, there are always situations where goals may be fixed. For example, you may have targets regarding compliance or safety that have very little wiggle room. However, where you can, I'd suggest discussing and agreeing goals at an individual and team level with the people involved in working towards them. Now, setting team goals can be a huge motivator for your team when done well, and when it's done badly, it can have the opposite consequences. Now, the way in which you set goals will differ between organizations, but hopefully you can find the right way to help your team stay aligned and feel good about the direction they're heading in. And I'd love to get your thoughts on this one. What's your experience with setting team goals? Do you find them useful, or do you find that your organization is struggling in this aspect? Let me and all the other Thoughtful Leaders know on the show notes page, thoughtfulleader.com/231. You can leave a comment there. Love to see what you think about that. All right, thank you for listening once again. Make sure you set positive goals, keep up the thoughtful leadership, and I'll be back next week.